was the episode where Jan went to for a sleepover with her sisters to the house of Robert and his wife Gail, and she woke up in the middle of the night. She found her panties down to her ankles, and he explained that she was tossing and turning, and that's what happened. Now, on June of 1973, okay, so this was before, we're going backwards. Remember, she was abducted later on, but let's go back to some of the red flags, and that's what we're trying to do by sharing all this information. But on June of 1973, Jan went with Robert and his family, his 5 kids and wife, to Seattle. They were gonna go on vacation. They've done this before. She's been into, different trips that they did as a family. And I think it's pretty common when somebody it's pretty close to one of the kids of the family that sometimes, they go to Disneyland, and then so they take it, they take the friends and whatever. It's pretty, it was common at the time, and I think it still happens today. So it wasn't nothing crazy. But when they came back and the things that Robert told Jan's parents, it was kind of interesting, to say the least. There was one night that they were at dinner, and Jan started to say things that made no sense. She would rock back and forth, and she would just act not normal. So Robert decided to take her to the room, and she remembers, Jan later on remembers that night, and she said that she was in and out of consciousness, that she was too tired, but that she remembers that when she woke up in the middle of the night, she saw B, or Robert, naked in her room. But she never mentioned this to her mother or father at the time. We're just gonna go back in time before the abduction, because I think that if we go back, it's going to help us understand. Well, no. Scratch that part. It's gonna make us see why they trusted, because I don't think nobody will understand why it took them so long to call the police. Or at least to call somebody else instead of the FBI. It's weird, okay? But I'm gonna explain to you the plan that Robert had to separate Bob from Marianne so he could get to Jan, okay? It's a Machiavellic plan, and it's something that, gosh, it would make the church look so bad and the LDS members, and this was a scandal that they just can't rub it off. So I am not saying again that people in this church is this way, but I want to show you how, with the shield of an institution like the LDS Church, they were able to hide. Some people were able to hide their true selves, their desires, and the things that they wanted to do. They hid them. They still did them, but not in public, so people would not judge. Which doesn't make sense in my head, because you shouldn't care what people think, but you should care what God thinks about you, in my opinion. But in the fall of 1972, 2 years before Jan was abducted, Marianne receives a call from Robert, okay? And Robert, the abductor, 2 years later. So Robert calls and say, "Hey, I forgot my lunch. I'm stuck in the office. Would you bring me a sandwich?" Well, let me tell you, there was a guy, a friend of my family, that would call me and say that. I would say, "What about your stay-at-home wife?" I found it very interesting that she was like, in the interview, she was like, "Sure, I'll make you a sandwich and I'll take it to the office." Something was going on, you know what I mean? It's odd. You're not gonna call a friend of yours and be like, "Hey, bring me a sandwich." special, different, beautiful. He would compliment how good you look, her legs and her hairstyle, and he would notice things. And like if she changed something, he would notice. So it makes sense, not for a married woman. Gosh, really? Do I have to say that? Um, but you know, when you fall in love with somebody, or where you're starting to notice somebody, those are the things that they kind of make you look at that person with different eyes, right? Again, for me, if you're not married, but if you're married, that would be a sign to get the heck out before you do something really stupid that you will regret. But that's just me. Anyways, they went to this conference in Logan, Utah. It's beautiful, but it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I'm assuming that there's some kind of temple or something there. I don't know. But they had this conference and they went. Now, no signs of Bob, Marianne's husband, or the kids. So I don't know how. Maybe because she was the chorist and he was part of some kind of other ministry in the church. But she said that they went to this beautiful mountain. By the way, yes, it is beautiful. And that they started to get closer. That they started kissing and hugging. And she said nothing else happened other than that. But that they knew they had to go back home and kind of leave all that behind. Now at this point, Marianne has been married for 12 to 13 years. And she kind of lost that spark with her husband. So it was like she was trying to find whatever was missing. But instead of telling her husband, she found this in this other guy. And I know that it sounds like I'm judging her. I am not. I believe that everyone has the right to do whatever the heck they want. And then face the consequences, because you can't hurt your husband or your wife and then skip the consequences. Those are part you either have to deal with them and be like, hey, I screwed up, and earn your forgiveness, their forgiveness, or you just break a relationship over something like an affair. So I'm not judging her. I'm just saying what irks me is the idea that she was acting like it was something innocent, and it was something we didn't have sex. Who cares? Who cares? So what I find a little bit weird is that she didn't think it was a big deal messing with this guy while she was married. That's what bothers me. The idea that she was so naive that she didn't know that having a relationship with this guy was going to mess up things for her. Consequences, karma, whatever the heck you want to call them. But she didn't think of those. Not at the time. Now let's go to Bob, Marianne's husband, the one that Marianne is cheating on. Okay. He told in the interview, and this was one of the saddest parts of for me to watch. I mean, the situation is horrible, but it made me feel very sad for the guy. Okay, so Bob, Jen's dad, said that one day he was at the office and he received the visit of Robert. this guy, I mean, he was Machiavellic. And if you don't know who Machiavelli is, you should look him up. I think they probably made the word evil manipulator after him. I mean, while Bob was telling this, and by the way, I think Bob died last November 2018, so we're talking about Jan's dad. And he, I mean, he's a dead guy, so go easy on him. I mean, if you watch the documentary, you could see how ashamed he was for breaking his wife's trust, even though she was cheating with the same guy. This was so sad to look this old. I mean, he's an old man by now. You know, white hair and with his little shirt. And I don't know. I don't know. I get feelings from the looks of people. And you could tell that the guy was truly regretting what he did that day. I don't get the idea of let's go for a ride and you help me. Give me a hand with this problem I'm having that my wife is not good in bed. It doesn't make sense to me, so I'm assuming that they had some kind of I don't know, flirting relationship, or that the idea was brought up at some point. But remember that homosexuality is something that is condemned by the church, and having some kind of a sexual encounter, even out of marriage, it's a sin. And having sex before getting married is a sin. It actually was not only a sin in Utah, but it was also illegal. Up until recently, it was not. They were not using that law for anything. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't enforced, I should say. So at this point, we have a homosexual relationship between Bob and Robert, and a relationship between Marianne and Robert. So, do you see how this works out for Robert? And now he knows stuff that if he tells people, it's going to destroy a family. And he needed that leverage. Okay, now on January of 1974, so this was before, remember that he took Jan in October. Robert was reprimanded, I can never say that word, by the church, the Mormon church. And instead of, apparently he was being inappropriate with a couple of young girls. And the church decided that instead of calling the police on this pedophile, they decided to send him for counseling, okay? And he did go, but when he came back from counseling, he didn't tell Bob and Marianne that he went there because he was being inappropriate with these young girls. Of course, this was confidential information between the church and him. He said that he went to counseling because he had a lot of abuse that he endured while he was a kid, and now that he was having to deal with it. So he said that the therapist gave him a few tapes and a little tape player thing, and that he asked them, can I go into your girl's room and spend the night there, or spend some time there while I listen to this? Listen, the counselor said that I had to do that, so if you let me do that with your girls, or with your kids, at least I'll get better, because this is what he said. And you can call him and ask him, and he will tell you that that's the treatment that he told me that I have to follow in order to get better. Bob, Jan's dad at the time, said, I trust you, go ahead. Later on, we learned that the therapist was not a therapist, that they actually removed his license, and that part of it was true, but some other parts were not. I don't know about the voice was as twisted, if not more, than this Robert guy. Now, sadly, we also learned later on that he was molesting her at that time. Before that time, he offered to separate the rooms of Jan and her sister. He actually built a wall between both of. It was a big room and it was in the basement, so he built the wall himself. So he had no witness, but basically what he would do is he would give these pills to Jan. There were sleeping pills, and he would abuse her. I'm gonna leave it at that. We don't need details, but he would hide these pills and say that they were vitamins, or that they were some kind of allergy pills, and that's how he got away with it. Now, according to court records, he slept in Jan's bed 4 times a week for 6 months. And he did that until the day he took her. So now you can see how this was building up to the abduction, or the first one anyways. The dad said that he just didn't like the idea of this guy sleeping in his daughter's room, but he just couldn't believe that Bob was able to do something to Jan, even though he knew that he was obsessed with her. I really don't understand that part. And I think I'm gonna stop today's video here, but with this reflection. And if something is telling you that it's not right, trust yourself. I know it's like a little voice that it's so dim and it's so almost you can hear it, that you wonder what is it coming from. But I'm telling you to trust it, and even if what that voice is telling you is the hardest thing that you'll do in your life, trust it. I think that they were good people, Bob and his wife Marianne. I think that they really didn't want to believe that somebody was able to do that. Being a pedophile back then, it wasn't popular, it wasn't in. You didn't hear those cases. There was no social media to put their faces all over the internet. So they didn't know better. But I think that even though they were far away from church, they were far away from God because of the behavior that they were having at the time. And that's debatable, because you could probably, I mean, maybe you think that it was good that they did that. I mean, that they had this affair with this married man. Maybe it's good in your book. I'm just saying what I think. That even though they were so far away from their true beliefs, I think they still had that little voice inside of them. Call it God, call it the Holy Spirit, call it common sense, the universe, call it whatever you want. But I think that voice was little by little was being faded by all the craziness that was going on. But they still could hear it, yet they chose not to. And I think that's when we make mistakes, when we choose to ignore what our gut, or what God, or what the Holy Spirit, or what the universe is telling you to do. And sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it sucks, and you don't really want to do it. And I did a little rant on my Patreon page when I recently had to pull my youngest out of school because I didn't like his friendships. I knew that he is in the 7th grade, and that my life would have to change, and that's why I couldn't sit in front of the camera and record videos for you, because I don't have the time. Like right now, I have to go wake him up to start schoolwork, and honestly, I didn't have to pull him out of school. I could have threatened him. I could have said, I'm gonna switch you to another school, but I knew that there was this very tiny voice inside of me that said, pull him out and homeschooling. You're not there yet, you can make a difference now. You must do a difference voice inside of me for a couple of months while he was getting in trouble. Stupid trouble, nothing crazy, but stupid trouble. But I know that stupid trouble leads to worse trouble, and then to the worst trouble, and then to the absolutely most worst trouble, because I was a bad teenager myself. I know, okay? As my mom. So I know that the only way to prevent it is to stop it when it starts. So I believe that God was telling me, hey, that's not good. And I was ignoring it for a while. And then this Friday, one of the teachers emailed me saying that he was not paying attention and he didn't care about what she was telling him. And I was like, that's it. And you're like, okay. Don't all teenagers do that? I mean, or preteens do that? Yeah, no, I knew. That was my sign. And I went to school, I pulled him out that day, and I learned everything that I had to learn in a couple of hours while I was taking my son to college far away, and my car broke down, and I knew that I had 100 obstacles and 100 excuses not to do it, but I chose to do it that same day because I knew the next day I was going to change my mind. And I knew it was going to suck for me because now I have no time. Now I have a kid here all day, and I need to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I got my little kid back. My sweet little boy. I got him back. And better than ever. So, how does this apply to the case? Well, I thought I'd mention this because I think it's something that we can apply to our lives. Sometimes our God, whatever you believe it's inside of you, is telling you what the right thing to do is, and we choose to ignore it. In this case, they chose to ignore it, and it ended up being the worst thing that they could have done. See, they were letting this evil thing in their house by having a relationship with this man outside marriage, by letting him sleep in his daughter's bed. It wasn't one bad thing or choice. It was the first choice that it was bad, and it led to the second one that was a little bit worse, and then the next one that was a little bit worse. And can you see how it goes? You can't expect to do things wrong and then get good results. You can't be so naive. You can't. You must understand, if you do things wrong, if you say this little lie, then you'll have to cover that little lie with a bigger one, and then with a bigger one, and then with a bigger one, and then with a bigger one. And at the end, you don't even know how this started, but it's out of control. So if you have teenagers and you have the little voice telling you this crazy thing that you should do, listen to it, because I promise you that once you make the decision, everything will start to open right in front of you, and every single door that you thought was going to be so hard, it's not going to be so hard. It's actually going to open for you because you made the right decision. It's hard to make the right decision, but once you do, things start to work your way so you can follow through most of the time. If it's your idea, well, sometimes it's not that easy. But if it's that thing that is telling you from your inside and you can't shut it, you can't, then that's one of the reasons why you should listen to it. They didn't. And that meant the beginning of a very long and hard life for all of them. Susan was not part of this. Karen was not a part of this directly, but they were affected by it. So, we're going to leave it here today because tomorrow we're going to talk about what Jen remembers after she was kidnapped. Where she was, what she heard, what she saw,